Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining her here on a Saturday evening. I am Nupur, the content specialist at Adda, and I shall be your webinar host today. So, a bit about Adda. We are an industry leader in community management, and our association with thousands of communities across 80 plus cities in India helped us understand the gravity of the second wave and its impact on the apartment residents. And that's what gave us the idea to conduct this webinar. Just a couple of things to remember, some important instructions. Please use the chat option only for conversations with the panelists and others. And please use the Q&A section exclusively for questions only. We will try to take in as many questions as we can. With that, I give the floor over to the panel anchor, Ms. Meera. Ms. Meera is the co-founder and editor of Citizen Matters. Over to you, Meera. Ma'am, you're on mute.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Very happy to be part of this session today. It's a very, very important topic, and it's been about a year since we last had an Adda session talking about how apartments can set up COVID care centers within the apartment. A lot of things have happened since then, a lot of learning, and today we are in a much more serious situation. And not just apartments, of course, all communities and groups are dealing with this crisis in different ways. So today we have a lot of experts here to learn from. So let me start right away that case. So we'll try to understand the current situation just to set some context. And I will invite Anish and Vikram to just talk about what is it that you're seeing on the ground? What kind of emergency situations are you dealing with as a, association as part of the management committee?
Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm part of Prestige Funds residency on Harlow Road. And last year also we have had this situation, and we thought about setting up a COVID care center, but it was difficult because we did not have any collaborations with the hospital. Nobody else was prepared to join hands. Fortunately, this time the situation demanded more support, and some hospitals have come forward to support the RWAs. And in that way, we have been able to collaborate with Manipal in setting up an emergency response room where there will be nursing as well as oxygen support, so that we can make a stopgap arrangement for the residents to take help when they are in need of oxygen, or if they have any advisory needs, so they want to connect to a doctor, and eventually they can go to the hospital and take emergency services. So there is a need now. We are observing residents requiring oxygen support. We have been supplying to some of them. At least 5 to 6 residents have requested for it. We have been able to supply, but in some cases they require more than oxygen alone. They want nursing help, because how to administer the oxygen cylinders or the concentrators is not everybody's business. So therein, nursing staff help will be required, and therefore we are happy to say that Manipal has come forward, and they have will collaborating with them in setting it up.
Thanks, Anish. Can you give us a little more details into the kind of setup? I'm getting right into the COVID care center now, because a lot of apartments are interested. They are setting up these centers in their own community. So
okay,
if we can just learn a little more. Just to give context, I think some other apartments have also set it up. We have Ranka Heights. In the morning, there was a BAF session where we heard about what they had done. They've set up 3 beds. They're a community of 200 apartments, and they have different equipments like oximeters, BP machine, thermometers, and BPAP machines, concentrators, and cylinders. So from your perspective, what have you done?
Yeah, so we are a 1,500 strong complex. 1,500 flats are there. We have started with 2 emergency beds, and both of them will have a concentrator and a CPAP machine. In addition to this, we have cylinders and concentrators anyways available for support to the residents. So we are coming up with only 2 beds, and we will set it up in the party hall where there will be enough ventilation or whatever is the need from the hospital. And the hospital will set up the infrastructure plus the nursing staff, and then they will establish an SOP so that if anybody requires admission into it for a small duration, it is not for a long duration. It's only till you get a bed in a hospital. So during that time, some of the residents are facing challenges that it takes a long time to reach the hospital. At that time, we are setting this up so that people can, residents can stay there for a while and get the support, and then they can go to the hospital, or maybe they recover and they go back to their home.
Right. Vikram, do you want to comment then what kind of, again, from your perspective, how are different departments, what are the kind of challenges that they're facing? This last one, I mean, this till you get a bed seems to be like a major issue that everybody is facing.
Yeah, I think, this time I just want to place a quick contrast in terms of the situation between last year to this year, right? It's important. Actually, we had done a bit of work last year as well in attempting to look at apartments who can set up in situ COVID care centers, but that had not moved. So, it didn't move to complete fruition. My reflective assessment on that is that last year the scale of the cases was not that high, in the sense people who had to hit the clinical stage and get hospitalized was still manageable. Rest of a lot of people who got infected, I think we were just coming on the backdrop of the shutdown, right? Lockdown. So a lot of them managed to stay home. So something like an in situ center in between was neither there, neither here, right? Either people wanted to stay home and get better, or they wanted to get, whenever they wanted to be hospitalized, I think there was availability. But this time the situation is very, very different, right? And I just read a interesting quote which said that, it's not a surprise that India's healthcare system is broken. It was always broken, right? It is broken for the rich now, right? I think that's the realization, right? Suddenly we're talking about. So I think that's the critical difference, that today people of all classes are finding it difficult to go, and suddenly we are talking about, what is the infrastructure, what is the capacity that we need to create. And hence it is a necessity to, even from the system, we are hearing that please set up mechanisms where you are able to have some time available, or you have some capacity. Either you buy some time in a facility which helps delaying going to the hospital because the hospitals are so crowded, or if better than that, if you are able to stabilize and get better, and because a lot of times cases could also be because people are panicking and things like that. So you can also then get better and go back home, which is where that layer will play a very important role. So this time I think it's very critical to move quickly and move fast and look at that intermediary centers, right, which can provide both time and some degree of support. So I agree to what Anish is saying that, it's not a full clinical setup, but it's a middle level setup. We have had one, I think, a guideline which has come in from BBMP, which is giving a broad construct on what is the kind of inclusions that you need to have if you are trying to set up an in-house COVID care center. But that is a guideline which is fairly extensive, and it's probably not possible for setting that to be applicable for all kinds of apartments. In BBMP's own admission, it is only applicable for large complexes which have space, ability to put up infrastructure, some bit of resident know-how that can be built, and clinical partnership which can be established. They go to the extent of talking about having in-house or full-time staff and things like ambulance, which is being there. I think that is a full-blown solution. So what we have told BBMP is that we will look at apartments as a small, medium, large category. And we are trying to now collect interest from all our members saying that, are you looking at equipping yourself to handle the scenario? Do you fall into a small, medium, large category? And accordingly, what is that you can do, right? For a small apartment, we probably will recommend them to look up if there is an empty extra apartment, which can then be like a temporary isolation facility, right? That could be one of the ways to look at it. The second medium category could be people who have some space like a party hall, etc. If they have sanitation potential opportunities, but little bit of equipment and some clinical partnership to help guide from a distance. And the third large one is somebody who can have the works, beds, everything will support. But we are also trying to see if some of those larger setups can also be tied into the neighborhood, right? Or other smaller and medium-sized apartments to form a
Right. We'll get deeper into that hub and spoke model and the cluster model in a while. But meanwhile, I have this question for Anish, and I'd also like Karthik to come in on how do you actually manage the resources bit? Because, getting a bed or getting a room is the least of the issue. Right? You have limited resources in terms of oxygen cylinders and concentrators. We've all been part of this whole, forwarding WhatsApp messages, trying to get somebody we know a bed or something. So it's really hard to find that. And how is it, Anish, how do you plan for that to, procure the supplies? That's one question. And from Karthik, I'd like to know how you would be able to support with the resources, because doctors and nurses, everybody is like stretched and there are limited resources. How would you be able to support apartment communities this way? Anish, do you want to come in first?
Yeah. So Meera, good question, but I don't think there's an answer right now. It's like hunt all over the place, whatever you get. So we have two sets of things. One is that, primarily resources are oxygen cylinders and concentrator, as far as I know. These are the two things which are very difficult to find. For that, what we are doing is we have a volunteering team. And in some cases, there are other resources which are available, but the residents are not able to go there and get it because they may be in isolation. So we have a volunteering team. It's a set of individuals within the apartment. As soon as a case comes, we request the resident if he wants to join the volunteering group, just as a listener or as a requester. And then there is a set of people who look at it and then help them out. For example, if they want to fetch some medicine or some food or something like that, so then they help. And then they can also request if somebody can help them find a bed. So it's like somebody else helping you hunt for a bed or a hospital and a testing facility. At the same time, oxygen cylinders and concentrator. So primarily on oxygen cylinder and concentrator, what we do is we have a facility management team which keeps trying for various vendors, and then whoever is willing to supply, we immediately send. So for that matter, today we got 2 cylinders refilled from Yelahanka. We are in Harlu Road and we sent an auto all over there, and then we got the total cost of transportation is 2,000 and we got it refilled. The refill cost is 700. So that is how we are. There's no fixed formula. There's no solution. It's like trial and error, I would say.
Right. And what kind of numbers are you seeing, if you can share that, just to get an idea of 2,000, what is the number of people affected? And
yeah. So last year, if the average number was 5 to 6, and we reached a peak of 25 at some point in time. I think August or September, we reached a peak of 25, and it was just once that we reached the peak, and then we went back, and average was 5 to 6. This year, we are consistently at 30 plus. We reached 50 at one point in time, and we became a containment zone. Now we are at 40. So I think average in this at this point in time, or for the last 1 month, is about 30 plus, and
right.
It's actually going up only. And only when we were maintaining 17 days of quarantine, so our number was slightly higher. I think with some other apartment was 14, so you have to carefully look at. Now we have reverted back to 14, and with that our numbers are like 40, around 40.
Thank you. Karthik, do you want to come in and say how, from Manipal's perspective, you're able to support community needs like this?
Meera, obviously these are very, very trying times, and obviously, physical infrastructure is a lot easier to put up than human infrastructure. Right. And so we've also been actually having an issue with, putting that human infrastructure in place. And therefore, scalability of this model, if you were to go ahead and look at it, is, 200, 250 apartments across Bangalore, it's going to be very, very difficult. So what we've done, we've actually reached out to our retired nurses. We've reached out to our nurses who are actually going off duty. Mm-hmm. We've reached out to nursing colleges to actually press people into service. So I think it's a combination of everything that's actually getting us to where we are. As far as doctors are concerned, there is a hero here in Dr. Satyanarayan Mysore. The work that he's been doing has been amazing. At one point in time, he had about 120 inpatients that he had to look to. his entire, outpatient was chock-a-block in terms of, so we're trying to go ahead and borrow time and trying to go ahead and look at this. See, at the end of the day, Meera, this is a bridge. This is not a permanent solution. The only thing that I would want to go ahead and tell you guys is today the pandemic is there, so everybody is rushing. But I think this model should outlive the pandemic, because if you do have an MI, if you have a heart attack, if you do have other emergencies, also these EMRs can actually go ahead and cater, because in the pecking order, in the hierarchy, it's a bridge between a COVID care center, and home isolation. So if somebody were to actually go ahead and get more sick, probably they get shifted to a proper COVID care center, which is closer to a hospital. And then in case, unfortunately, they would need superior care, they'll have to move to a hospital. So as I told you, we're trying all our best. In fact, if you actually see recently, some of our, nurses from our KH Medical College Hospital have flown all the way to Delhi to, go ahead and take care of the situation over there. So it is tough, but we're trying to go ahead and manage through whatever resources that we have. But the retired nurses have come forward to actually go ahead and help us. The off-duty nurses have come forward to help us. The nursing college people have also principals have been kind enough to go ahead and spare some nurses. Doctors, again, are in short supply currently given the pandemic. So it's tough there, and that's the only worry, that the scalability of the model probably will be a little questionable unless we get 30, 40 hospitals coming in and then starting to go ahead and look at this whole apartment complexes as a bridge between really needy patients and people who might require the first port of call. So that's how I would define it.
So as an individual organization, how many sort of such apartments, let's say, could you, I'm just saying a very rough sort of number.
See, we are at Ranka, we are at Prestige Ferns, we could be at Prestige Lakeside Habitat as well. I think we're about close to 5-6 complexes right now. And we would want to go ahead and look at this. Nobody expected this kind of a wave to happen. I guess Dr. Satya will explain that, when his turn comes, as to the proportion of what the pandemic has been between wave 1 and wave 2. So currently it is 6, but we would like to go ahead and increase that. We have thrown an SOS into the nurses coming in, because without human infrastructure, this entire model will not, move at all. How much ever we train the residents, it's not going to replicate core nursing care. They would be able to, manage for a while. So we've tried to go, look at, we've pressed our HR into service. We've, contacted whoever we can to actually come back and really look at helping us. So overall, I think maybe 10, 12 at the most right now. And maybe after that, as we start to go ahead and look at this as a core model for healthcare, we might be able to go ahead and increase the number.
Thank you. I do have more questions in terms of, again, the scalability, how many apartments can actually set this up and how they can team together and so on. But I also see Dr. Satyanarayan have joined, and I don't want to keep him waiting. And this is the most important resource there is today. So, sir, let me just quickly jump to you and the kind of the questions we have for you. If you could quickly just talk about specifically this wave and the unique characteristics, like, and how, everybody says it's more virulent, they're different kind of symptoms, and specifically apartments which are sort of high density areas, right? Like perhaps like slums, low income communities. Apartments are also in some ways, in terms of population, very, very dense. What is it that such dense communities should do and should be wary of? Correct.
Thank you, Meera. I think Mr. Karthik Rajgopal is an extremely modest man, did not list out what Manipal is doing, both in terms of streamlining and as per his plan, we have made inroads into community at a larger level. I'll explain that. So, having treated nearly 4,000 patients in the first season, the second season, I thought, yeah, I think we have mastered the approach to this illness, and it is not going to be a big issue. That is the initial first 10 days. Having said that, when I started my rounds on a particular Sunday in the beginning of the second wave, I felt that maybe this is not the virus that I kind of dealt in the first season. It is scary. What we started noticing is people as young as 20 and 30 with merely 48 hours of having a positive test and some symptoms that necessitated the test, are just going on to 10 to 15 liters of oxygen. And at the same time, we have various governmental agencies talking about conserving oxygen, limiting oxygen, when here every patient seems to consume a huge amount of oxygen need. So that represents a landmark departure from the way the disease was behaving in the first wave. Home isolation was probably much more than hospitalization in the first wave. In the second wave, as a doctor, I do not feel confident that we could do the home isolation, suggest home isolation for many of the patients, because with the mutation of variants or variants of concern, maybe that may be the root cause. We do not know clearly. Whenever there is a mutation, we look at does it change the clinical behavior in a patient? Otherwise, virus tends to mutate. So there is nothing special about it. But here, definitely something has changed and looks little scary. However, rather than being seized with fear about such a dreadful change, I think I will just go on to say, what can the community do at large? We are aware of the guidelines that we have received from the government about COVID care centers in the apartments. A lot of deliberation, Mr. Karthik Rajgopal did point out to various stakeholders in the hospital, and it was his vision that we should reach out to the community. So what we did was reach out to elected legislature members, ministers, and strengthen the grassroots functioning at communities. And three examples. We did touch base with Mahalakshmipuram, Mahalakshmi layout, and they started implemented rather our plans that Mr. Karthik unveiled, which is very simple. Can we start triaging in the community level? I'll tell you how triaging helps at community level. Let us say anybody will reach out the MP's office or MLA's office in the community. So I want a bed in Columbia Asia. Then they have a panel of 4 doctors who will find out telephonically what are the medical needs. And it appears that the patient has no desaturation, doesn't require oxygen bed in, say, Columbia Asia. So he is directed to some nursing home where, you know, they may not require tertiary care or quaternary care. Whereas another deserving patient medically requires expertise goes to Manipal or Columbia Asia. Therefore, you have a equitable distribution, and that distribution is kind of helped onto by the stakeholders in the community itself. The second thing Mr. Rajgopal told us is to ensure that we do an extended critical care support to smaller hospitals. Now, there has been a bit of reluctance from the smaller hospitals in accepting patients with probably some complexity. So we have kind of set up wearables, monitoring, remote monitoring in some of the hospitals, and liaise with them, give them whatever medical expertise they need, and that way ensure that smaller hospitals can take the load and therefore serve greater number of people in the local community. The idea is, if there is a particular hospital in, say, in Kagadaspura, and we can support it, then Kagadaspura apartment residents need not have to travel, you know, huge kilometers to come over to a bigger hospital. So right. These are some of the initiatives. Then on the when you look at the required amenities that BBMP suggested for COVID care centers in the apartments, they spoke about, it's not easily doable kind of thing. 24-hour, 24/7 support, medical expertise, support staff in 2 or 3 shifts, and the ratio is 1:12. Identify empty apartments. Few things are practical, few things are not. But I'll tell you what one of our urologists did in his apartment. There was an empty flat in the ground floor where he managed to get a couple of beds, an oxygen concentrator. But working with people like me, he was able to list out the safety guideline. We said, do not wait for the saturation to come down to less than 92%. Because if it is, say, 92, 91, you have lost valuable time in looking for an oxygen bed. So early intervention in these patients usually has a bearing on the outcome. Then we also were able to say that CDC Georgia has come out with guidelines that every time a positive patient travels in an elevator, you don't have to do sanitization or fumigation, and just a surface contact cleaning is what the CDC recommends. Working with other stakeholders in the hospital, we were able to kind of break down the guidelines given by the BBMP for garbage disposal of waste masks and other things. Panel of GPs to be enrolled by the apartment. Some apartments are doing that, and we tend to, liaise with the GPs so that we can support them for people doing home isolation. So most important in this kind of the size of the pandemic, the scale of the pandemic is so huge that we need to consider reverse barrier care. That is elderly patients. You need to ensure that domestic help or whoever, do not interact in a physical way where transmission can occur. So you protect the elderly, and that seems to be very important. The infectivity rate is very high. Entire households are getting, turning positive. Therefore, very important that the infection control measures are done. The same also applies to diagnostic center tie-up. Home care, but diagnostic center tie-up, because we've seen that waiting times for lab pickups have phenomenally gone up. And therefore, each apartment needs to have a tie-up for blood collection and, testing. So these are some of the points I felt, which is taking the interest of the apartment, residential welfare associations, the change in the viral behavior, and kudos to Mr. Karthik Rajgopal, who's been in forefront of pitching straight into the community.
Thank you, Doctor. Very quickly, 2 questions. So one, we are seeing this situation where the patients, it's suddenly deteriorating, right? The, saturation level goes down and so on. So how do you prevent this? Commonly everybody advises proning, but beyond that, is there anything else to be done? Number 2, there is this dilemma of, dealing with such quick changes, right? The patient condition changes so fast that when do you start trying for beds? Because once you get a bed, you want to go there, even though you may not need it, because when you need it, you may not get it, right? This dilemma is a huge, one of the huge issues in why you're not able to get at the right time. So how do you deal with these 2?
Sure. So point number 1, when we do telephonic consultation or video consultation with patients, what do we say? We say that if you experience coughing prang, coughing attack, repeated bouts of cough on trying to take a big breath, medically what we call as alveolitis, that is the functional unit of the lung is getting inflamed. So that is the kind of time when the oxygen levels can fall. So that should be a wake-up call for patients or the relatives or whoever is caring for them, that do not ignore cough. Do not reach for a cough syrup. That's only going to suppress the cough. But the real issue is that maybe the start to significant drop in the oxygen levels in the next 24 to 48 hours. Point number one. Point number two, somebody is saturating, their oxygen levels are more than 94%, well and good. Now, if the oxygen levels are dropping anything less than or touching 92, do not take a chance. Book a bed, because in the next day or so, you will end up requiring the bed. The other thing is also true. If the saturation has been on the lower side, your symptoms are more, then there is no harm in booking a bed, say 3 days from now. And if you don't need it, if you are getting better, you just cancel out the booking. So there is a degree of unpredictability, and that we need to remember. It is not scaremongering, but a fact that the disease this season is little, of a variant.
Okay. And any specific things that apartments need to do, like they're talking about, there was a study apparently which talked about, the airborne viruses coming through ducts, because apartments, again, some apartments can be very, very dense and back to back with each other, right? And what about a lot of apartments use treated water for flushing? So these are all like concerns that people have here. So specifically in this kind of building design, what would you advise?
So let us look at data that came early in the pandemic first wave from Germany, Singapore, and France, and one more country. So the data was that they went around COVID hospitals, COVID care centers, and started doing swabs from the surface areas. What was interestingly found is up to about 10 meters or so, you would find the genetic material of the virus, but it cannot grow. It's kind of dead genetic material. So the air transmission at that point of time was not favorably looked upon. However, in the last 3 months, there has been talk about air transmission. Now everybody wants to believe it. And the reason is, many people say, I've not even traveled out of the home. I've been in the home for the last, so many weeks. And how did I get done positive? And these kind of questions, people tend to agree more with the air transmission theory. So coming to the crux of the issue, there are simple solutions. If you look at the some of my talks and John Hopkins International, we have been never a big fan of air purifiers. So if there is a common duct that is shared, I think using an air purifier in this kind of a situation is not a bad idea. Point number one. There is no point in looking at the wash basin and other things where there were some theories that virus from the other house can come through, climb through. Those are very far-fetched theories with no basis. So point number one, ensure there is collateral ventilation into the home. Even the virus cannot stand if there is a collateral ventilation. Air purifiers, limited amount of air purifiers, especially bedroom if you are spending longer time there with the lockdown and things like that, or living room if you are glued to the telly. So these are smaller things that can be done. Now, last but not the least, which is the country that probably has not seen second wave and third wave, is South Korea. The South Korean experiment is that most of the South Koreans are extremely pedantic, religious, meticulous about using masks. and they use a mask well in the home as well. And therefore, we have not seen any wave after the first wave. I think if you share common ducts and other things, and you feel you are at risk, it is not a bad idea to wear simple mask when you are even in the home.
Right. Thank you, Doctor. I think that pretty much answered all the questions also that came from the audience at this point and on related to the virus itself. Let me quickly move on to the vaccination because I'd like to address all the questions for you immediately. So one is given the limited supplies right now till the supply eases up, we're going to have to figure out a way to prioritize who to vaccinate. What about people who are there are a lot of people who got the first dose and the second dose seems to be an issue, like many clinics and hospitals have run out of supplies. So what do they need to do if they're not able to get the second dose? What can they do?
Sure. So even one dose of vaccine has been shown to have some efficacy. Some people have put it at 56%, and the basis of this seems to come from the UK, where half dose was given inadvertently with respect to the AstraZeneca vaccine. So when the immune system is presented with the prototype model of the enemy, it quickly goes on a learning spree and starts developing some degree of antibody. Antibody titer is not important because remember that immune system has two arms. One is to produce antibody. The other one is to take what we call a cellular mechanism or T cell immunity. Therefore, instead of hitting the panic button, I think trust your T cell, trust the first dose of vaccine that you took. Point number one. Well, if we did not have a vaccine, we would have meticulously stuck onto mask. I think the efficacy of any vaccine, whether it is Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, will never be able to match up with the fact that mask is more efficacious than anything. 1.5 years, more than 6,000 patients, and I have not developed COVID, nor had any antibody, till the vaccination. Therefore, when I look back, I think even at this point of time, I'm very, very particular about wearing a mask. So mask is going to be a big answer. If we want to sing obituary to this virus, say in next 2 years, we want COVID, SARS-CoV-2 virus out of circulation, I think it is not just universal immunization, it should be masking up as well, because the virus will not get into the host to survive.
Right. Thank you. So again, about vaccination, there are also newer vaccines coming from abroad, right? Many of them have got approval now. From an apartment perspective, many of them are looking to hold vaccination camps, and they have constraints about some of these new vaccines have constraints in terms of storage and administration. So by default, of course, I think mostly it's been Covishield right now. But is there like anything you think is more suitable for a vaccination camp when there will be more choice?
So I think I didn't list out the plan unveiled by Mr. Karthik Rajgopal, which was one another thing that he suggested is to ensure the vaccination drive. What can private healthcare unit like Manipal do with respect to vaccination? Subject to availability, we were pushing in for door-to-door vaccination using our MARS and manpower availability. That is one of the issues that we think. Now, when the vaccines were being considered, what we thought is an ideal vaccine is if it can be given as one single shot. Ideal vaccine is it should not require too much of a cold chain dependency, and it should be, quickly transportable. Now, so if you look at Pfizer and Moderna, -70, -40 seems impossible that you can maintain the cold chain. You may still get Pfizer and Moderna in the days to come. But would I trust it? Because how am I sure that somebody intermediary has maintained the cold chain? Because if you don't maintain, mRNA vaccines will not have any efficacy whatsoever. So then comes the two that we are familiar about, and 82% efficacy for Covaxin and AstraZeneca given 8 weeks apart. Covishield may even go up to 90%. Then we have 2-component vaccine like Sputnik, which may hit the communities. And there even, the storage and other challenges may not be there as much as what we see for these 2 vaccines. Around from 6 months from now, we will have J&J, which will be efficacy-wise somewhere between 60 and 80%. But then the promise of single dose, one-shot vaccine. So, and it said DNA vaccine. So, number of things yet to come out, but I think mask will be the substitute till we get those vaccines.
Thanks. And one other thing about the question about the side effects, because any vaccination camp, usually they'll tell you like, oh, you may get a fever, you may get body ache. But if you look at the Western countries, some of them have had this concern about this clotting. So they may be rare, but there are possibilities of serious side effects. So how can those who have got vaccinated look out for those symptoms and prevent, because they can be prevented, like clotting, you can avoid it or you can treat it in time. So what should people do?
So I remember very distinctly that after having done my medicine and post-graduation in India, I didn't think much of clotting, issues or formation of clots, emboli. Then 15 years in Australia, I learned many things, that the Caucasian gene it behaves in a different way, and the coagulability or clotting, the propensity to form clots is extremely common in the European population as opposed to Indians. So I think when the meta-analysis of this clotting with the AstraZeneca was done, it was recognized that on average you have 3% clot, which is a huge number, which goes reported unrelated to vaccination. However, in the vaccinated population, without controlling against the unvaccinated population, there was, a spree of 9 countries holding off the vaccination with the Covishield or the AstraZeneca thing. There have been molecular theories coming out saying how the vaccine probably extremely rarely does lead to formation of clots. The most common sense filled answer to this problem is, it is so rare and common things happen commonly, point number 1. Point number 2, once you receive a jab, do not kind of, you will feel feverish, you may get frank fever, but do not kind of, give up the mobility at that stage and hydrate very well. There is no data currently to support taking, I've had a jab, so can I take 1 aspirin? That probably is not going to be supported by evidence. But yes, avoid rest, drink plenty of water, hydrate yourself, and that should prevent foreclose any issues of clot.
Okay, thank you. And this very common question a lot of people have had, because some people have contracted the virus after the first dose. So how long do they need to wait after the recovery? This seems to be a very common situation.
Yeah. So from the time of total recovery, that is, let us say, now the current guidelines, if you are aware, says 10 days of isolation is okay. We do not know how the 10 days isolation came into picture, because all studies have shown that the virus, most of the virus will die out by 9 to 14 days in our body. So the question that we need to focus on is that from the time of total recovery, so let us say 17 days from the first day of symptom, we need to wait for at least 2 months before we go for the jab. In this, there is one more caveat. If the clinical course of the patient was very stormy and they were totally oxygen dependent, ventilator, extracorporeal oxygenator or ECMO, those patients may be even up to 3 months.
Okay, thank you. I think that's pretty much covers all the questions on. So it is necessary to get vaccinated after recovery, but there is a time period between 2 to 3 months. And broadly, it's been like more through droplets, aerosols, and possibly airborne, but we should not be too worried about surfaces and lifts and so on, right? That's what your general advice is. Yes. Okay, and if you could just summarize, maybe this could be the last point for you. Summarize the usage of mask. How often do people need to reuse or wash? What about N95 mask versus like surgical? I know it's a very common, we've been talking about it for like a year plus now, but still there seems to be this confusion. Would be great to hear from you.
So this is a simple, cheap, economical N95, but the problem is that if the same mask, if I go out in sunlight, there is a faster decay due to UV rays. Whereas in the indoors, in the hospital, it can last about 6 to 8 hours. Beyond that, the filtering efficacy drops down. Therefore, in general, 6 to 8 hours, go for a change of a mask. If it is a disposable mask, ideally it should be disposed, but then this planet is going to be so rich with the plastic disposal, mask and PPE in the coming years. So I shudder. So one of the things that we all follow is if it is an N95 mask, you worn it for 6 to 8 hours, take that out, put it in a brown bag and, mark on it which day you wore and keep that away for about 6 days. Then you can actually reuse without, doing anything because the virus would be dead. So you can have 6 masks and you can rotate it. Now, some time ago, say 3 months ago, there was an article about using 2 masks, double masking. But word of caution, you need to put this on before you put any mask on, double masking. If I wear a mask and on top of it, if I wear a N95, it will not form the seal that is required. So that will negate both the masks. Third thing, there were studies to show that cloth mask is not effective. In fact, 27% more chances of infection, not with COVID, other bacterial infection as well. So cloth mask, you can go for 2 of them, but make sure it is washed thoroughly as soon as you come into the home. Take that out, put it for wash, and wear another new cloth mask. So I suppose this is elementary but simple tips about using of mask.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. If I can just move to Karthik, in terms of setting up the COVID care center, maybe you can just come in a little bit on that. What is it that, the process by which you would set up, the kind of, support that you would provide? I think a lot of people would like to know that.
Yeah, Meera,
just take off from the last time you were saying.
Yeah, I think Dr. Satyanarayan has explained it very well. I mean, obviously, when apartments approach us, there is a recce that is done. We're looking at, and I guess Vikram also alluded to that, in terms of how we can actually look at in terms of small, medium, and large. And one of the thoughts that we were having is large apartment complexes even have houses that are vacant because people don't want to rent it out. Is there an option of actually going in and setting up, a center there? And then we look to going ahead and, what are the resources that are required in terms of, how many number of beds depending on the occupants over there. Do they have a large format hall? Because some of the apartments like the one in Prestige Lakeside Habitat has a very, very large format hall, which can actually get converted. There is a lot of ventilation, etc. The number of residents, so it could be 3 beds, it could be 4 beds. We then plan our, human resources accordingly. Then the physical infrastructure is, set up. There are these oxygen concentrators. There are these beds that need to get, purchased. Obviously, nurses oversight, etc. So I think the planning process depends on one, the size of the apartments, the number of occupants. How are we actually going ahead and looking at what services do they require? And I'm again insisting, Meera, today there is a pandemic and there is a lot of rush for all this. I guess whilst the healthcare system, as Vikram said, may have crumbled, I think as health consumers, we've also been very, very lax. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. Certain models like the emergency medical room in apartments will outlive the pandemic, because we've lost, 40% of the heart attack patients die even before they reach the hospital because they don't have, help that is actually coming in. And that is where the basic life support training, etc., needs to, go. So my only request to the apartment association is, guys, when the pandemic goes out of fashion, please don't go ahead and close up the emergency medical rooms, because there will be other emergencies that we need to actually go ahead and deal with, because this is just replicating the model that we have in corporates, which is called the occupational health centers. We run that across many large employee-based corporates, and they've been very, very successful in actually going ahead and saving lives in an emergency. And probably Dr. Satya will also say that, look, once the pandemic stops, it's not that people are, going to be diagnosed with COVID, but what the after effects of COVID would be is also something that we need to go ahead and look at, which will render all these, EMRs very useful. So to answer your question, Meera, it's a call that we take with the apartments in terms of size, etc., and then do the necessary planning. There is a standard format that we actually go ahead and bring in terms of the beds and the oxygen concentrators, the nurses that we actually go ahead and provide, and also training to the apartment complexes. There would be one representative, one single point of contact where we actually go ahead and look at it. There are commercial codes that are exchanged, and basis that the apartments then decide how ambitious they need to be as far as this particular project is concerned.
Can you tell us that a little bit about that formula, like how many households or how many people, what is the size of the population that you would look at to per bed, let's say?
See, just at the moment, Meera, when you really, I can't give you a straight formula for that, because there are certain apartment complexes which have a larger number of people who are actually suffering from COVID. So they, even though the size of the apartment may be small, they're actually going ahead and having larger number of beds, just because they'll have to go ahead and cater to, an emergency. But roughly around, if you really look at it, around 200, 250 houses, if you can have about 2 beds, I guess it should be fine. But in a pandemic, the apartment complex that I'm saying, as of today, there are 225 people with COVID. So, we really can't do that kind of planning right now. In a normal situation, we'll probably be able to go ahead and plan better. But given the fact that there are certain hubs, there are certain, hotspots, we definitely need to go with the situation in terms of what is actually happening in the apartment complexes, and then actually go ahead and plan. So at this point in time, I wouldn't probably allude to a ready-made formula, but the maximum that we've actually gone ahead and set, and I guess Anish he can come back and say for Prestige funds, there is a certain logic by which they decided that they will have, this many number of beds, because the only issue is a 6, 7, 8 bed facility would mean that many more nurses, pressed into a service, which again is probably in the minority right now. So no straight answers to this. We'll have to actually go ahead and plan it out. Maybe Anish might be able to explain that better.
Okay. And quickly, are all the human resources going to be virtual, the only online consultation, or physically would you be able to station
the nurses,
paramedics?
The nurses would be physical, because without a physical interface, I guess it may not take off. But if you really need somebody like a Dr. Satya to come in terms where, the oxygen is going down, etc., that is when they connect to the hub to go ahead and get an immediate, response from the clinician. So if you really look at it, nurses would probably be the physical interface. Maybe doctors might visit once in a while, but the virtual interface will happen with the clinicians.
Okay. And what about the other infrastructure like the cylinders and the concentrators, the BPAP machines, and what is required and what kind of cost would you refer to?
See, ideally, I guess it would cost about 300,000 to go ahead and set up a 2-3 bed infrastructure with all these in mind. Some of the things naturally come from the apartments itself, because complexes, because you definitely need internet connection, because to go ahead and connect all this. Philips has been working with us on home, ICU monitoring. Those are licenses costs that actually come in. So ideally around a 325,000, I think you should be able to set up a decent, emergency medical room. And outside of that, your recurring cost would be the cost of manpower that would actually come in for the nurses.
Okay. And the kind of equipment, concentrators or cylinders, or what are the things that usually are part of this setup?
See, the oxygen concentrators are there, obviously, because they're able to go ahead and make up oxygen from the air, and you just need a little plug point to actually go ahead and look at it. And as we were speaking to our clinicians, and maybe Dr. Satya can come in, is that 10 liters is what is actually preferred. But 5 liters is also desirable. Even in our COVID care centers at both Royal Orchid and Sterling Mac, we've actually put in, oxygen concentrators. None of these had this model in mind, Meera. To be honest with you, even when we actually started the COVID care centers in the hotels, we thought we will resist from actually going in and looking at oxygen, etc. over there, because there were very, very clear cut guidelines for triaging of patients. But right now, given the fact that the hospitals are absolutely full, we thought we will actually go ahead and look at a longer engagement with patients in both COVID care centers at the hotels and in the emergency medical room at apartments. And therefore, the oxygen concentrators actually, came into being. And that's where we are right now.
Okay. And there are apartments which are just looking to procure just concentrators or just cylinders for their, without a tie-up with the hospital. Would you, Anish, do you want to take this question? Maybe, do you think it's feasible for individual RWAs to even kind of take this decision without
Meera, I'll just answer that question before Anish comes in. Now, if the RWAs are having access to medical resources, like nursing and clinicians, on their own, probably it's advisable to go ahead with infrastructure. But otherwise, if they're not able to manage that, I would find it a little risky to go ahead without human infrastructure, trained human infrastructure. I guess Anish can answer it.
Yeah, Anish, do you want to come in with how you're creating the SOP and so on?
Yeah, I agree with Karthik that it's not easy to have just the infrastructure, because there are cases where people require more than just the infrastructure. They were not able to connect, or if they do not have the right equipment. Somebody says oxygen mask, and you go and procure an oxygen mask which is not appropriate. So there are challenges without the nursing staff. It's a complex area. In some cases you may want to go, because concentrators are a little easy to use. Cylinders are a bit difficult. If you're not able to set up, there is no other way. So better have it. But if you can set up, prefer that.
Right. Okay. Again, more logistics related. So I'll just take this particular question for Karthik. What are the safety measures that, when you organize a camp, vaccination camp, so that it doesn't become a super spreader event? Very basic question, but since every apartment is now organizing camps, this is something that they should keep in mind. Also, do doctors recommend getting tested for COVID before vaccination?
Do doctors recommend? The second question, maybe I guess Dr. Satya would be able to answer better. The first one, in terms of what we actually need as far as, we've done a lot of RWA in the first phase of the vaccination program. And I guess, most of them have done it fairly well. The entire event has been fairly spread out. We've really had, people coming in batches. They have their distance that is maintained, etc. But obviously, there are certain norms that we look at when we actually go into apartments. Obviously, the inoculation area definitely needs to be air conditioned, because I guess otherwise the cold chain will not be maintained. While, some of the theory was we can have 3-4 fans closer to the inoculation room, etc. The AC air condition is definitely the preferred route. We definitely need a waiting area. There are actually 3 boxes if you really look at it. There is a waiting area, which is, for patients who have registered and waiting for the inoculation. There is an inoculation area where actually the jab takes place. And then there is an observation area where people are observed for, 30 minutes for any adverse reaction, if any. And, they can leave, after that. But, if you really have very, very small places that are not very well ventilated, etc., maybe it's not advisable to do it actually in the RWA. But what happens is, at least the process that most leading hospitals have been following is actually go ahead and do a recce with the apartment complexes, find out if they're conducive for, the vaccination program, and only then start to go ahead and look at it. But before many more questions come here, at least in Karnataka, we've really not got the approval as yet to do the second phase of the vaccination in the apartments. We are waiting for that. Some of the corporates have got the clearance to go ahead and, have on-site inoculations there. Apartment complexes, we've not yet got. At least Manipal has done almost, close to about 80-90 apartments in the first phase. But right now, given the fact that the vaccine is in tremendous short supply, we've really not got the approval from, the BBMP to inoculate in apartments. But as soon as that is there, we'd be able to go ahead and start. But to answer your question, fairly ventilated rooms, a 3-tier formula, waiting area, inoculation area, and observation area. The inoculation area needs to be air conditioned.
Okay, thank you, Karthik. And just the last question to Dr. Satyanarayana. There was this one question, maybe if people are ready to, for example, you have, friends and family from abroad who are ready to send concentrators, and as gifts now it is allowed. So if there is that possibility, what kind of concentrators would you advise people to send?
So point number 1, oxygen is a drug. It's a medicine. It should be regarded as a medication. Point number 1. Oxygen will not become a panacea for maintaining the patient indefinitely in the RWA COVID care center. Why does the oxygen drop? The body, our immune system has recognized the virus by the 2nd week and has gone on a counter-offensive with the singular purpose of killing the virus. It has now started a cascade in the lung. So that is when the oxygen starts dropping. What would I do medically? I would look at the time. If it is anywhere crisscrossing the 7th day, I would actually start the patient on steroids. I would get them to prone. So there is a definite medical approach. If the laboratory tests show that the IL-6 is high, I may use drugs like tocilizumab, dexamethasone, baricitinib, many other drugs. So just by putting somebody on oxygen, you're just going to delay the inevitable. And the inevitable is they will end up requiring an ICU bed, which we don't want. So having an oxygen concentrator, how does it help? So do we actually need it at all? Let us say somebody has COVID, they've done well for 48 hours, 72 hours. Suddenly they start experiencing a lot of cough. Oxygen saturation is hovering around 94. Put the oxygen on, contact your medical provider, talk to them, and put on the least amount of oxygen to keep the saturation more than 94. Now, at least you are assured that in the next 6 hours, somebody will get you a bed. Now, if the cylinder was not there or the concentrator was not there, your downtime to get the bed would be quite short. In the next half an hour, you have to find a bed, which is impossible in today's situation. Therefore, the oxygen concentrator should be looked as a stopgap arrangement. and the very big warning that somebody is going on oxygen, they need to actually head to the hospital or COVID care center for definitive treatment and proper medical intervention. Point number one. Traditionally, right from Israel to US to India, all cylinders, all concentrators, whether it is Nidec, Invacare, or the Israeli one, no concentrator used to give oxygen beyond 5 liters. It is 0 to 5 liter. However, market players like Philips came out with 7.5 many years ago. So we did a calibration work in St. John's maybe 12 years ago. And we found even though it is 12 liters output, but you are only getting somewhere around 5 or 6. So do not be deceived by the promised number. It may not happen. Now, we are getting concentrators where the manufacturers can claim that it is up to 10 liter. A 10 liter, would I trust? No, I would basically say 5 or 10. The fact that we need to not lose sight of is the fact that they have gone on oxygen. Yes, time to get them proper medical help now. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Thank you, Doctor. I think we pretty much covered everything from, dealing with the emergency situation. When do you escalate? When do you get to doctor? When do you start trying for a bed, to vaccination and so on? So thanks a lot to both of you. And I now want to ask Vikram about actually operationalizing some of these ideas and these, these approaches that has come to when you talk about community centers. So one of the questions, for example, has been, not every apartment is 200 or 800, right, which can afford to set up an entire center. How can one apartments collaborate on this, or even at a neighborhood level? I think we need to start looking at, when I say community, it's not just within the apartment. Can we start looking at the larger neighborhood? And after this, I'll also ask Sridhar to come in, from a government perspective, what is going on and how at a ward level some of these things can be done. And at the same time, then I will invite Mr. Mangesh to talk about what we can learn from Mumbai. So starting with Vikram, over to you.
Yeah, I think, first of all, phenomenal insights from Dr. Satyanarayana and Karthik. I think very, very useful. A lot of things which are, in this information overload, we tend to miss the fundamental basics as well, right? As simple as even mask wearing, which he clarified. So thanks for that. And I think Karthik gave a fairly good perspective in terms of what the approach is going on right now, which is not at least from their perspective, it cannot be a cookie cutter approach, but they need to look at how equipment, person. So there are essentially 4 pieces, as I see, right, which needs to come together. One is sort of space infrastructure in that sense, right? Then there is equipment and stuff. Then there is clinical sort of personnel and bandwidth that way. And fourth is there know-how which can also be integrated among volunteers, etc. Right? So these are the 4 elements which needs to come together. And like in a large complex, there's a very good possibility that all these 4 can come together in one place. But whereas in the smaller and medium, it cannot, right? Which is where I think, federations and groups like us can play a role to sort of have one-step macro view and see how can we then patch together. That's exactly the effort we are doing. So right now we have already reached out to all our members to do like a cluster-wise view to see how many small, medium, large. And in each of their cases, we are trying to collect data on what do they have of these 4 things, which is space, which is ability to sort of invest in infrastructure, ability to seek or at least pay for good qualified clinical service, and 4th, availability of both normal as well as clinical, paraclinical volunteer bandwidth, if you say that way, right? If there are GPs in your own complex, it could even be, final year medical students, whatever, right? Now even government is enlisting that. So we are trying to collect that data. One, to see at a aggregate, we have sort of, as a federation, we have 25 clusters today, each of which is about 30, 40 apartments, right? We are trying to get that view to see if we can construct a model where there can be small, medium, and large identified and tagged kind of stuff, right? And between them, is there a model that we can fit to say that, if we can bring in a Manipal or someone, partners like that, we are talking to Manipal, 2 or other 3 people, to say that, hey, can you equip a large complex this way? And can we create that sort of credible soft infrastructure around for the neighborhood apartments to collaborate, starting with our own members to first, right? I mean, they are all in the neighborhood, and we can put in some bit of thinking on how we can bring them together. That is one part. Second, we are also seeing if there is opportunity to collaborate with other institutions and people in the organizations in the neighborhood. In today's morning's call, somebody mentioned about exploring conversations with schools which are there in the neighborhood. As we are doing this webinar, I got a message from one of my GC colleagues who said that, a company, a multinational company here in JP Nagar who has their office has reached out and said that, hey, they are willing to maybe use their office to create a space which can apparently have 50, 60 beds at least. Now that's a large scale CCC, that reasonably good scale CCC that can happen over there, right? So we are also trying to see if all these actors can come together, and probably it's a responsibility for federations, groups like us to also reach out, like I was telling in the call today morning, saying that is there an opportunity for us to reach out to a confederation of schools, for example, right? Private schools or whatever, right? So I think at an institution level, we should now start talking very quickly to say, hey, what do you have? Right? Do you have space? Do you have ability to bring infrastructure? Do you have people? Right? All that, and then create that community level. But to begin with, within our own federation, we are now trying to do the small, medium, large grouping and create a template which can then work within that grouping itself to start with. You're not able to hear.
Sorry. So I think it's important to consider this one point, which is, if apartment, let's say individual apartment sets up, or even a group of apartments set up a center with all this infrastructure, and at whatever point they don't really have the patience or the need, right? And you have in a time where all these soft and hard infrastructure is at a premium, right? It's limited, there are constraints and no availability. We've seen people waiting in queues for cylinders. It's sort of doesn't seem fair to just hoard it, because we may have residents who may need it at some point. Tomorrow, day after, somebody may need it, but today somebody else need it. So is there a way to look at it with the larger scheme of things, saying, can we think of it as a neighborhood? And I'm saying this is a sort of a theoretical question, because it's about the mindsets, it's about how we perceive what we mean by a community.
No, absolutely. See, it is not just it's a ethical dilemma as well, right? And we have had this question internally asked, and I definitely keep asking that to myself as well, saying that is it sort of protectionism versus sort of ethical compass, right? We'll have to I always sort of convince myself, saying that, hey, when the system is probably not very objectively accessible, people will start becoming protectionist, right? Now we have seen that in the case of there being oxygen wars between states, right? I think I read an article where between Maharashtra and Karnataka, there was something going on, right? That is likely to happen at all levels, right? At the end of the day, I think I have the right to protect my family. Somebody at a community will say, so people are actually buying, so many individual households are buying concentrators, right? And it was great to hear from Dr. Satya on what is the effectiveness of it in the first case, right? Because people are really buying and holding concentrators, right? I know for a fact that in LLT South City, in Arekere, Professor Rajagopalan and team have created an appeal where they have created a community center where they have said, please contribute concentrators and equipment like that to the common pool, where it can be maybe better used. And we will ensure that if there's a priority in your household, we will return it back to you. I thought that was a good, smart way of pooling together resources at 3 places. So we need to start. I think the first instinct is for people to see what they can do for themselves, which is okay. I always convince myself to say that is how likely reaction is going to happen. But now is the time where we can quickly also stitch together models which can slightly improve the efficiency, community, right, neighborhood. All that is what we are beginning to speak now. We need to move fast to that level.
Right. Thank you, Vikram. I just want to get Mangesh Ranawade here, and he is part of a very large society or association which supports multiple societies across Mumbai. So from your perspective, how do you see this the relationship between apartment RWAs, MCs and the government, because it's very, very decentralized, and Mumbai model now is being talked about, that they have been able to manage and better deal with the COVID situation there?
Yeah, hello everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to just share with you that the entire system, which includes the public administration, the state government, as well as the doctors and as well as the chairmen and secretaries of various societies, have really done a fantastic job for the last 1 month, or perhaps before that as well, when the second wave just shot up and everything went haywire. And that's the time everybody came together and worked to benefit everyone in the community goes. And that's what I would like to just share with you, what our association have the feedback from this second wave, or perhaps the talked about third wave coming up, and what precautions we could take, we could curb it to a certain level. First and foremost, from the apartments or from the society's part, which we have found out is prevention or precaution has made a tremendous effect with the spread of COVID goes. I just want to add that myself, I am also being in the medical field. I am into pathology, and we have our own labs for testing centers across. What we are finding out very serious matter is that the younger generations, the children, are getting more affected. Just in the morning, I had done an antigen test of a 10-day child, and she turned to be positive. So it's happening from the children part, where they go and mix up and play. There we need to put some curbs there as societies to see that they are more into indoors, because when they spread and they move, they keep on spreading across houses to houses, and where senior citizens quickly contract them because they keep on having the affection with the children as well. And we have seen a very stark kind of thing happening with the children. I've talked to pediatricians, and they said that the number of infected children are going up very high, though they were earlier also, but the kind of spread is more, number one. Number two, people who keep on spreading up should be a little bit stopped. For example, the vendors who are moving around, then there'd be a doodwala, paper wala, the maids, the servants, the laborers. We have done a study, and we have found out another very starking thing, that we tested around 1,000 maids across societies, and we found that 15 to 20% are infested. They have tested to be either antigen positive or RT-PCR positive. They are going to go to each houses, and then they're going to mix up, and what stage they are in the spreading stage, we don't know. So perhaps regular screening of the vendors or the maids. I meant also telling you the vendors also have, not only the maids, but the vendors of the doodwalas, the ironing walas, istri walas are found positive. Surprisingly, they don't have any symptoms. So that's one. Second thing we should take care is that the vendors, the regular visitors should be checked up, and the easiest way and the hardest way, both are there. The easiest way is the antigen, where the societies charge 250 or 350 rupees per test, and that's not the very high, so that they can contribute across the society people, or maybe the owners do spend. And every 15 days, if they're properly screened properly, we have found that many have, so there's a good sizable number to people to come inside and spread across. Third thing which I'm feeling good about is the steps taken in the cooperative societies with respect to isolations or once they are seen positive, is to make them aware that they need not go outside or they need not to spread. So isolation has been a good part in various portions of Navi Mumbai. As rightly said by Dr. Satya, 10 days is what is more than sufficient. But the surprising thing again is that some societies keep on asking you get a COVID negative certificate once you're COVID positive. But that doesn't happen, which we have seen that some of the individuals or some patients come positive even after 20 days of treatment. Though they are on the conservative treatment, they are not perhaps even hospitalized, they still get a COVID positive after 20 days. When we talk to medical practitioners, they say that he's not a spreader. He will not spread across because 10 days or 12 days or 14 days, as per medical terms and conditions, are good enough to that person to be moving around. So number 3 is this. Number 4 is regular testing, which I personally feel societies should propagate and amongst the members or the apartments. Rightly said by Dr. Satya is that setting up the COVID centers or perhaps the primary centers where oxygen is, or maybe a small two beds for 250 members. Yes, that's working good. But the problem here again is you have space, you have resources, but the medical system is tremendous today in Mumbai under pressure. So perhaps you wouldn't find a MD medicine or perhaps a COVID expert able to spend time to do a video conferencing with somebody in society who's having a COVID center. So that's a little bit a challenge, which maybe the big institutes like yours is Manipal. We have a lot of institutes here. But honestly, that didn't really work on a larger scale when it comes to Mumbai. What really made the difference is the precautions, the testing, and the protocols, which are making a lot of difference across Mumbai. I can say that's the key point is testing and precautions. When it comes to the community or the society, is screening is the most important thing, which is helping a lot of societies to come out of it. Even the containment zones tend within 8 to 10 days or 12 days, they're able to come out of this problems. Yeah.
Very interesting. So you're saying like by default, this is like a lot more testing compared to other cities is a key thing.
Key thing, yeah. And I think so people who are visiting regularly need to, I think so antigen test now at malls.
Instant.
Yeah, we have 150 rupees or 200 rupees costing, but you can try to screen some people who you feel a little bit doubted at.
So you think this is something you would recommend that apartments do just like, by default for people coming in, like, or the staff, everybody? Yeah.
Every 15 days, you have a vendor, you have a frequent visitor. He or she should be screened. Either the best is RT-PCR. Let me tell you, RT-PCR has shown fantastic results vis-a-vis antigen, because as we have taken the 1,000 maids survey, we found with antigen, you get only 8 to 10% positivity rate. But when we're doing RT-PCR, it's whopping 20%. Whopping. Now, this is something which all medical practitioners have endorsed, that RT-PCR is the final test to screen some or do the testing.
Right, right. Thank you. And what about, experience with the government in terms of, dealing with the finding beds, or they coming and proactively checking with the communities and so on, triaging, contact tracing? How's been the experience?
Yeah, that's a challenge when at all levels, the medical system, the government and the communities are under tremendous pressure. Is that at one point of time, I remember some 10, 15 days back, when one cannot get an RT-PCR report even after 3 days or even the 4 days. Such kind of a pressure you have, where each lab is stormed with perhaps thousands and thousands of samples per day, and they cannot just work it out. I think so. What happened was it's a peak that raised up. Now we are out of it. We are working very nicely. Then the public administration was also tremendous pressure. I can tell you tremendous pressure. The hospitals still are. I like so what the level was 100 there. Now we are 50 and we are doing public very good job. I can say good about the state government. They have taken very strong. There we have remdesivir issue here. We have vaccination issue here. Though they have done it, they have fought it out. But we are at a good stage now, I can tell you. And as far as when it comes to cooperative housing societies, I will once again reiterate the fact that you need to screen, and that's the key point there.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was very, very useful inputs there. And last, I'd like to ask Sridhar, if you want to come in. At the end of the day, we are talking all of that. What we are talking about is, private provisioning of public services, right? And what do you think of this? I mean, at the end of the day, like these are things that should be part of public healthcare. What they should be ward level triaging. And there's been some of these recent notification in Karnataka and looking at India and at least the major cities, how do you see this sort of panning out, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, I guess we have spent almost a decade and a half thinking about the limits of privatization, right? I mean, I can privatize my power supply, I can privatize my water supply, but public health is probably what you can never privatize, right? And I think we should understand that India is in a transitional phase. There is a lot of progress that's happened in India over the last 3-4 decades. And some sectors have grown fast, some sectors haven't. And that's where, this coexistence or rebalancing is very much required. So somewhere I think the core is rebalancing the role of society, government, and business is at the crux of how India can get out of COVID as well. Looking at something that Vikram was mentioning about how resources can be pooled in and made common resources. Yesterday in the afternoon, somebody said, hey, I'm an old boy of this school. Can I reach out there and request if, there's a hospital next door, can we make it a common purpose thing? In less than half a day, the school agreed. Today, they have spoken to the joint commissioner of that area, and most probably you will probably have 150 beds, and that can go up to 300 beds in the next couple of days, right? And I would urge every one of us to look at these common pool resources, right? And make sure that we enhance them. And there are doctors on the panel, and they would agree that, you need to enhance our triaging capacity. And at the same time, we need to create stabilization areas or facilities where people can be stabilized without having to be put onto an ICU or a ventilator, right? So, and then there are enough steroids to help during critical phases. Under careful medical supervision, those patients can be turned around with just a couple of days of intensive medical care. So some of these ideas are now making way into the government, and thankfully, BBMP at last recognized the most unrecognizable institution called as the ward level institution. They came up with this new notification and giving birth to something called as Ward Decentralized Triage and Emergency Response Committee, right? And it's called, and it's abbreviated as DETER, and hopefully will deter COVID with better public and private participation in this phase. And I would like to refer to a question that was raised by one of the attendees here. I think Rima raised the question on COVID donors. And Rima, I presume you're talking about plasma donors. And I would say that the best way is for you to create those databases and then, reach out and publicize and say that, here is a bunch of donors who are readily available. And then, if you want, we can cross-collaborate and pool and make the pool bigger. Ideally, we would have preferred that the government facilitates this, but we know where government is, and at the same time, we need to step up and kind of start organizing our own resources and collaborate across, right? on platforms like this where BIF and ADA are there, probably what protocol you set up and what common resources you pull in, you can actually collaborate with 1,000 apartment complexes overnight. And that's something that we at Kautilya will be very happy to facilitate. We are constantly working with the government of Karnataka, government of Telangana, and BBMP as well on kind of telling them what are the key things to change. And there is certain lag, but nevertheless, there is willingness to change. Some officials come back and say, you said this on this particular day, can we do this, right? Yeah. So Rima, continue on that. And there was one other question that was there on the Q&A, and which I think is pertinent of, where is this gentleman? There was something about what are the limits of RWA rules and regulations.
Yeah, that was my question. Last question, Sridhar, that what is the role of the RWA? Because it's not a statutory body in that sense, right? It's you can only give guidelines. And this is, I know in the last year and a half, especially, it's been huge challenges between residents and RWAs because, guidelines are flouted or questioned and you can't really enforce, right? And this is in a way, RWAs come from, a larger sense of what is good for the community, what's good for the most number of people. And yet there'll be individuals. For example, there is a recent question here saying, what about the status of domestic help? I'm a frontline COVID worker. My wife is a doctor and both of us have duties, and who will look after our toddlers, right? So it's a very fair ask, but at the same time, there's a standard like policy. And of course, many RWAs do give exemptions on a case-to-case basis, but what is really the role of the RWA? How can they, in the absence of something like pretty much, most cities don't have a functioning ward committee, which is like the third tier. But if that can be done, can RWAs be the fourth tier to actually really decentralize, almost like a panchayat, where for every 500 people, you actually have a governance thing which is, accessible to you?
Bira, after living in an independent house in Bangalore all these years, in Telangana, I am now in Hyderabad, I moved to an apartment where there are 8,000 residents, right? So now you can imagine the mind shift that I am facing. But essentially, let's go back to the crux of it, right? An apartment association is an entity which comes together by all the members coming in and agreeing to a bylaw, right? Go look at your bylaws, go look at your formation document and see where all you have agreed already on certain things. And if not, have a conversation, right? I mean, the benevolent dictator is a very fair idea, but we know that will never work, right? There are people's real rights that are involved. So it has to be a give and take. And somewhere, the registrar of societies on that day, he will wake up and then he'll say, oh, you know what? I don't like your face, and hence I'll undo whatever the resolution that the MC has made, right? So let's look at respecting basic, the fundamental rights, the fundamental duty of the fundamental rights of citizens, the right to work, and then make space, right? And I think what Mangesh said makes a lot of sense of telling, a RAT, an RT-PCR is a reasonably good investment for the apartment association to make and keep its own community safe. You can actually do good amount of sampling techniques where not just these workers, even residents can be sampled in a certain fashion systematically, and you can bring down you can detect them very easily, right? And I think that's where we have to elevate our governance models and not get caught into saying that I will decide on your behalf, right? Because there is no end to it, right? I'll tell you whether your maid should come or not. I'll tell you whether you should keep a dog or not. And then I'll tell you what time the party should go on or not. And where do we draw a line in a contested area like this, right? So that's where create your AGMs, put them to vote, build consensus, and then take a larger thing, right? And we should always remember that, apartment complexes are probably more affluent sections of the society. The more public commons you create for yourself and your neighboring apartments, your neighboring residential layouts, etc., then you will be seen as responsible players. And it doesn't take much, right? I mean, you can figure out a pricing model of how others can use your common facilities as long as it's segregated enough. I think that's the way we will create more commons. There will never be enough beds for us to allocate in a pandemic, right? And we have been We have seen the tough phase, and this is only the second wave. The third wave is going to be much worse, right? So let's come together and put those common protocols and evolve from there, right? And even thankfully the DITR guidelines are talking about mapping resources, right? Please make use of this opportunity, map your resources, say, here is a template we have created. Let any neighborhood who wants to do this, we can do a training of how do you map your resources. And we can then say on what terms can it be made shared purpose, right?
Right. Thanks, Sridhar. I think we pretty much covered all the questions, and even there are some recent questions about masking and about when to take the vaccination and whether to have aspirins or blood thinners. So I think it's all of these questions have been answered. Participants and others can go to the Facebook page where it's live streaming. You can actually go back and look at the questions that have been answered. And also it's been live tweeted by Citizen Matters, so you can go catch some of those things there and see who said what. Yes, Sridhar, you wanted to add something?
Well, I mean, I just completed my 21 days of isolation. That was my fourth RT-PCR test, and I think I would just say invest on tests. Whenever you are in doubt, just go get that RT-PCR test done. You will have peace of mind for the next 30-40 days, right? So 3 times I got tested, I had peace of mind for the next, till there was something for us to be worried about. Don't worry, COVID is something that you can overcome. 4 of us have tested positive, and all 3 of us are out of it. The 4th one is on their 12th day. We can get out of this under proper medication. Please don't self-medicate. Always talk to your medical professional. There are steroids involved which you should not take before the right time and the need exists, right? So just wanted to underline that, Meera. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, to all the panelists, Dr. Satyanarayana, Karthik Rajagopal, Mangesh Ranavade, Anish, Sridhar, and Vikram. Thanks a lot. I think we heard a lot of very, very useful points, a lot of takeaways today. I think we pretty much covered all the questions from the attendees also. Thanks, everybody. I'm sorry we took a little longer than planned. And I will hand it over to Ashish and Adda, and they have a very, very important facility that they're providing for apartments that can use these features to plan their camps and so on. Over to you, Ashish.
Hi, safe evening to all. I think we are in the middle of a crisis, which has kind of taken us by storm. Everyone has been doing their bit. Apartments are coming forward. Health workers are doing absolutely everything that is required to do. Different corporates have also come forward doing everything possible. Adda, if you look at it, has been catering to more than thousands of communities. We have got about 1 million users who uses Adda on a daily basis. All the features that you see on Adda today has been built just keeping one thing in mind, our users. It's well thought out. All of these features. When COVID struck us last year, we came out with a feature, okay, which is known as a quarantine feature. I'll just take a couple of seconds and I will be sharing my screen to show you the glimpse of that. So this is the very familiar landing page of Adda, which all of us are probably used to. Now, very recently, we have launched the vaccination tracker. And last year, we had the quarantine tracker. So if anyone goes to the quarantine tracker, let's say for the residents, what they can basically do is they can go and see the units which are currently in a quarantine position. Okay, it also shows the date when this quarantine period is getting over. Now, how does it help us? So first and the foremost, if you look at it, when we know that a particular unit is under quarantine, as a fellow neighbor, they require a lot of help from us. There might be elderly people, there might be people where, they are not in a condition, to probably even get the groceries and the medicines. Okay, we as residents, we can always help them. The second most important thing is that, we also keep an eye on when the quarantine is getting over. This is a very useful information for the admin, and they can always pull out reports based on that. Just a couple of months back, we launched what is known as the vaccination tracker. We are now in the middle of the largest vaccine drive ever. Vaccinating 1 billion plus population is not a matter which has to be taken lightly. So here, what happens is you get to see all your neighbors, the other unit members in the society who are vaccinated. It also gives the information which doses they have taken, whether it is the first dose or the second dose. Importantly, for the MC members, you want to drive a vaccination center within your society. You need the details, the date of birth, what is the age, are they 45 plus, they are 18 plus, who is coming for the first dose, who is coming for the second dose. All of this information is now readily available to them. Okay. So as you can see, the first dose, so we have the shield and the sword. So also it helps the residents to get in more information in case if they want to know who are the other residents who are already vaccinated. Are there any kind of after effects? I mean, who else to ask better than, you have known someone for years together and you have been living with them. So along with this, there are a lot of other features, but I would not be discussing this, okay, in the session today. But this is something which you already have in the Adda app and you should be using. Yeah. So, yeah. Meera, that's it from my side.
Okay. Thanks, Ashish. I think we're done for the day, and I'll just wrap up. And thank you everybody to all the panelists. And if there are any more questions, you could put it on the Adda, like on the Facebook page or on Twitter. You can tag us or Citizen Matters. We will try to get additional information. So thanks everybody, and good evening.
Thanks, Adda.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.